South Park built its reputation on being untouchable. Over 300 episodes, every celebrity, every religion, every political figure fair game. Most people assume the creators always had the last laugh, but one researcher spent years quietly documenting a pattern in the show's darkest moments that Parker and Stone have never addressed. In this video, we break down the darkest South Park iceberg, the 5 episodes that no longer exist. July 4th, 2001 is when Super Best Friends first aired, and at that point, nobody particularly cared that it depicted Muhammad. The episode ran through Comedy Central's rerun schedule for 9 years. 9 years of repeats, 9 years of late-night slots and weekend blocks, 9 years of being a perfectly normal entry in the show's catalog. The episode was the 68th of the series overall, a parody of a 1970s Hanna-Barbera cartoon called Super Friends, and its central joke was that David Blaine, the real-life street magician who had been a cultural fixture around that time, had started a cult called Blaintology. The cult was a thinly drawn parallel to Scientology, complete with brainwashing and manipulative recruitment. To fight it, Stan enlists the help of Jesus, who assembles a team of religious figures from across world history: Buddha, Moses, Krishna, Joseph Smith, a character called Seaman, who was a parody of Aquaman, and Muhammad, who was depicted with fire powers and stood alongside the others as a straightforward member of the team. Muhammad appeared clearly, spoke, acted, and participated in the plot. When the episode finished airing, no organized group protested. No network executive received a formal complaint about that specific content. The episode went into rotation, cycled through for nearly a decade, and nobody particularly thought about it. What eventually made that episode disappear had nothing to do with the episode itself. The world changed around it, and the change started in a Danish newspaper in September 2005. Jyllands-Posten, a major daily publication in Denmark, printed 12 editorial cartoons depicting Muhammad. Several of the cartoons were critical of extremism carried out in the name of Islam. The publication framed the decision as a statement about freedom of the press and the willingness of Danish media to extend to Islam the same satirical treatment it would give any other subject. The reaction took months to fully develop, but when it arrived, it was severe. Protests broke out across multiple countries through early 2006. Danish embassies in several nations were set on fire. In some cities, the demonstrations turned violent, and people died in the resulting clashes. The cartoons had transformed the question of depicting Muhammad visually from a matter of religious sensitivity into something with real-world physical consequences, and that transformation made the landscape for South Park fundamentally different from what it had been in 2001. Parker and Stone were watching all of this and had opinions about it. Their response was Cartoon Wars, a 2-part episode that aired in April 2006 during the 10th season. The premise was that a fictional episode of Family Guy was going to show Muhammad on screen, and the fictional town of South Park erupted in panic at the news. Characters buried their heads in the sand, literally, in order to prove they had not seen the Family Guy footage. The military got involved. The plot split. On one side, Cartman, who hated Family Guy and saw the controversy as his opportunity to have the whole show canceled, and on the other side, Kyle, who argued that freedom of expression meant allowing uncomfortable material. The episode was doing two things at once. On the surface, it was a long-running joke about Parker and Stone's genuine dislike of Family Guy's writing style, but underneath that, it was a direct argument about censorship and the double standard of who could and could not be satirized on television. Parker and Stone had originally planned Cartoon Wars to be the season opener. Comedy Central told them no. Negotiations between the creators and the network about whether Muhammad could appear in the episode were not resolved in time, and the season opened with a different episode instead. When Cartoon Wars eventually aired, it aired with a compromise that Parker and Stone publicly resented. At the moment in Cartoon Wars Part 2 where Muhammad was supposed to appear, Comedy Central replaced the footage with a black title card reading that the network had refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on television. The episode then, shortly after, showed the animated Jesus Christ defecating on a crowd and on the American flag. Comedy Central aired that without hesitation. The contrast was not subtle, and it was not accidental. Parker and Stone had written the network's own refusal into the episode, and then directly juxtaposed it with content about another religion that the network had no problem broadcasting. The argument was sitting right there in the cut. The network understood the argument and still put up the black card. Neither half of Cartoon Wars would survive long-term either. Both parts eventually joined what would become a list of 5 episodes that exist in a category completely separate from the rest of the show's run. 4 years passed after Cartoon Wars. Parker and Stone turned their attention to other subjects through seasons 11, 12, and 13. The show remained controversial in all the usual ways, generating complaints and headlines and occasional threats of legal action from celebrities, but the specific question of Muhammad was left alone for a while. Then the 200th episode arrived. The 200th episode of South Park aired on April 14th, 2010, and its premise was built around the show's own history. Every celebrity celebrity South Park had ever mocked was joining a class action lawsuit against the town. Tom Cruise, who the show had depicted hiding in a closet and refusing to come out, was leading the group. Barbra Streisand, Rob Reiner, and a long list of others were filing suit, and their demand was specific. They wanted the town to deliver Muhammad to them. The logic was that Muhammad possessed a power no other celebrity had, a kind of immunity to ridicule. The fictional celebrities believed that if they could extract this immunity from Muhammad and transfer it to themselves, they would never again be susceptible to mockery. The episode was structured as a celebration of everything the show had accumulated over 2 decades, and it was also a very clear statement about censorship, about the difference between a religious figure who could be shown and one who could not, and about what that difference implied. Within days of the 200th episode airing, a New York-based organization called Revolution Muslim posted a response on their website. The post was addressed to Parker and Stone. It compared them to Theo van Gogh, a Dutch filmmaker who had been shot multiple times and then stabbed to death on an Amsterdam street in 2004 by a man who opposed his film's criticism of the treatment of women in certain Islamic contexts. The Revolution Muslim post included a graphic photograph of Van Gogh's body. The text stated that Parker and Stone would probably meet a similar fate for what they had aired. The post also referenced the addresses of Comedy Central's offices. The author later told reporters that the post was intended to raise awareness rather than constitute a direct threat, and that the image of Van Gogh was meant to illustrate the severity of what Parker and Stone had done. The distinction between raising awareness and issuing a threat was not one that the people who read the post found particularly meaningful. Comedy Central responded to the 201st episode with the most comprehensive act of censorship the show had ever experienced. Every reference to Muhammad in the episode was bleeped out. When the character appeared, a large box with the word censored covered it. But the network's intervention did not stop there. At the end of the episode, Kyle delivered a speech. South Park had a long tradition of ending episodes with Kyle speaking directly to the moral of whatever story had just unfolded. His closing speech was the show's way of landing the point it had spent 20 minutes building toward. In the 201st episode, that speech was about intimidation. It was about what happens when the threat of violence becomes an effective tool for silencing expression. It was about what it means to let fear determine what can be said in public. Comedy Central bleeped the entire speech. Not a word of it went out. Parker and Stone issued a public statement the following day. They made clear that the bleeping of Kyle's speech was not a joke on their part, not a clever meta-commentary on censorship delivered through the form of the episode itself. It was Comedy Central's choice, made without their approval. Kyle's speech, they said, had contained no reference to Muhammad at all. It had nothing to do with the Prophet. An uncensored version that later circulated confirmed what the speech actually contained. Kyle said that he had learned something. He said that throughout the ordeal, they had all wanted to show things they were not allowed to show, and that the reason for that was not some magical power, but the power of threatening people with violence. He said that was obviously the only true power anyone had discovered. Jesus and Santa Claus joined the speech to reinforce the point. If you instill enough fear and demonstrate a willingness to cause harm, people will give you whatever you ask for. That was what got bleeped. A 2-minute argument that capitulating to violent threats makes violent threats more useful, delivered by 3 cartoon characters, was considered too dangerous to air. Both the 200th and 201st episodes were nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2010. They received that nomination while simultaneously being pulled from every platform on which South Park existed. They could not be streamed. They could not be purchased digitally. They were not available on the South Park Studios website. The physical DVD box set for season 14 does contain both episodes, but only in their censored broadcast form, with Muhammad's name bleeped throughout and the closing speech still silent. The version Parker and Stone originally submitted to Comedy Central has never been officially released. When the 200th and 201st episodes were pulled, Super Best Friends went with them. The episode from 2001 that had aired 9 years without a formal complaint about its Muhammad content was quietly removed from reruns and from streaming at the same time. The reasoning was consistency. The episode showed Muhammad uncensored, and leaving it available would create an obvious inconsistency with the decision to censor or remove every other Muhammad appearance. Retroactively, an episode that had never been considered a problem became one. Fans who went looking for it on the South Park website found it simply absent. There was no announcement, no statement. It was gone. One strange footnote to the whole situation is that Muhammad had appeared in the show's opening title sequence for several seasons, completely uncensored, even after Cartoon Wars Part 2 had been censored, and even after the episodes that followed. For a period, the man whose image could not be shown in an episode was still appearing briefly in the animated opening credits every single week. That situation was eventually resolved too. The count as of the end of this process was 5 episodes across a library of more than 300. 5 episodes out of a catalog that includes animated depictions of Jesus doing things that cannot be described in most contexts. Buddha using cocaine at a party, multiple sequences depicting acts of graphic violence played for comedy, real historical atrocities staged as jokes, and a long list of living public figures placed in scenarios they almost certainly found objectionable. None of those episodes are gone. The 5 that are gone are connected by a single shared element. The show has never been brought back down to 4. The strangest dimension of the whole story remains the 9 years that super best friends spent cycling through reruns without incident. It sat in plain sight for nearly a decade, depicting exactly what would later be considered so dangerous that the episode had to be made to disappear. What changed was not the episode. The world shifted. The stakes around a specific kind of image became suddenly and violently clear, and an episode that had never been a problem became one simply by still existing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 5 episodes across more than 300 are permanently gone, all sharing a single thread. The story of how South Park got to that point runs through a chain of events that started years earlier, with an episode about a closet, a movie star, and a religion that does not take kindly to being satirized. Section 2. The real reason Chef died. Weeks after the episode that supposedly destroyed Isaac Hayes' relationship with South Park, he performed chocolate salty balls for a crowd at the Memphis Pyramid. He dropped the song in the middle of his set, got the entire audience singing along, and by all accounts was having the time of his life. A journalist who was there that night reported that Hayes was in a great mood, glowing, still clearly delighted that fans recognized him as Chef. That was November 2005, just days after the episode called Trapped in the Closet had aired, and reportedly caused the kind of offense that would eventually end his 9-year run on the show. The performance in Memphis did not look like a man on the verge of publicly denouncing the people he worked with. The episode itself aired on November 16, 2005. The premise was that Stan, while trying to save money for a bike, accepts a free personality test from Scientologist recruiters. The audit determines that his thetan levels, a measurement used in Scientology auditing to assess a person's spiritual state, are the highest ever recorded. The Scientology leadership concludes that Stan must be the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the religion. Tom Cruise, upon hearing the news, rushes to meet the supposed new Hubbard and asks Stan directly what he thinks of his acting. Stan gives an honest answer. Cruise is good, but not as good as the guy from Napoleon Dynamite. Cruise, devastated by this assessment, retreats into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. John Travolta arrives to help coax Cruise out. He also ends up in the closet. R. Kelly is called in, and he too ends up in the closet, while narrating everything around him through sung monologue in a parody of his own multi-part music series. Comedy Central had reportedly told Parker and Stone they could not imply or state that Tom Cruise was gay. Parker and Stone asked whether they could have him literally be in a closet refusing to come out. The network said that was fine. The resulting joke ran through the entire second half of the episode, with characters repeatedly imploring Cruise to come out of the closet, in terms that were entirely literal and entirely not. The episode also did something no other piece of mainstream television had done at that. Midway through, a title card appeared on screen reading that what followed was what Scientologists actually believe. The episode then laid out the religion's origin story, involving a galactic ruler named Xenu who, roughly 75 million years ago, had transported billions of people to Earth and destroyed them with hydrogen bombs. The souls of those people, called Thetans, were said to have clustered around surviving humans and caused their psychological problems. This was treated as a straight dramatization, presented without additional jokes, allowing the content itself to carry whatever reaction the viewer had. A journalist named Mark Ebner, who had written extensively about Scientology, served as a consultant on the episode to ensure the doctrine was represented accurately. At the end of the episode, Stan calls Scientology a global scam and dares the church to sue him. The credits then rolled. Every single name in the credits had been replaced. Every writer, every animator, every production crew member, Parker and Stone themselves, all of them appeared as either John Smith or Jane Smith. The entire staff of the show had been anonymized. The reason was not hard to understand. The Church of Scientology had a well-documented history of using litigation as a pressure tool against its critics. Replacing every real name with a generic placeholder was a way of protecting the production team from being individually targeted by the organization. Reports emerged not long after that Tom Cruise had applied pressure on Viacom, the corporate parent of both Comedy Central and Paramount Pictures, where Cruise was preparing to shoot Mission Impossible 3. The reported threat was that Cruise would withdraw from the film if the South Park episode was not pulled from syndication. Cruise's representatives denied the reports. What is factual is that a planned repeat of the episode was quietly pulled from the schedule in March 2006. Parker and Stone issued a public statement that has since become one of the more memorable things either of them has ever said publicly. The statement addressed Scientology directly, informing the organization that they might have won that particular battle, but that the million-year war for Earth had just begun, and signed it as as loyal servants of their Dark Lord Xenu. Comedy Central declined to comment. By March 2006, the episode had been pulled, the statement had been issued, and a press release had gone out under Isaac Hayes' name announcing that he was leaving South Park. The release cited intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs as his reason for departing. It specifically referenced his 40 years as a civil rights activist and his conclusion that the show had crossed a line. It did not use the word Scientology. What Hayes' son would eventually confirm is that his father suffered a stroke in January 2006 before the press release was issued. The stroke left Hayes unable to speak coherently. He was in no condition to compose a statement, make a phone call to a network, or formally withdraw from a long-running professional commitment. His son said later that Hayes' immediate circle at that time was composed entirely of Scientologists, including his personal assistants and close associates. Someone within that circle issued the press release. Hayes himself, physically unable to speak, had no way to contradict it. The timing of the evidence is important. In early January 2006, just before his stroke, Hayes gave an interview to the AV Club, the editorial division of the satirical publication The Onion. The interviewer asked him directly about the Scientology episode, whether it had bothered him. Hayes laughed. He said he had talked to Parker and Stone about it, that they had not informed him it was coming until it was done, and that he understood what they were doing. He did not express offense. He did not say he was considering leaving. He laughed about it. That interview was his last public statement about the show before the stroke hit. 2 months later, a resignation statement appeared under his name. Stone later said publicly that shortly after the episode aired, Hayes had called him, and that it had been clear from the conversation that someone had sent Hayes to ask them to pull the episode. Stone recalled that the call felt unusual, that Hayes seemed to be delivering a message rather than speaking for himself. Parker and Stone chose not to mention any of this publicly at the time. They said they allowed Hayes plausible deniability. They did not want him to be held accountable for an ask that they suspected had not originated with him. Parker and Stone responded to the press release with an episode called The Return of Chef, which aired on March 22, 2006. Chef's voice in the episode was assembled entirely from audio clips taken from previous seasons. The editing was noticeable. His lines did not always land naturally. The episode's plot had Chef returning to South Park after being brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, a thinly constructed parallel to Scientology. Chef, under the club's influence, had become a child predator. The boys tried to save him. They failed. Chef's death in the episode became one of the most discussed moments in the show's history. Lightning struck the bridge he was standing on, setting him on fire. He fell from the bridge into a ravine, hitting rocks on the way down. At the bottom, a mountain lion attacked him. Then a grizzly bear joined the attack. The death was prolonged, gruesome, and staged to be as extreme as animated television could manage. Following the death scene, the episode showed the boys delivering a memorial in which they urged everyone to remember Chef as he had been, not as what the Super Adventure Club had made him. The eulogy was genuine in its sentiment. Chef, the episode suggested, had been good and kind until outside forces corrupted him. The blame was placed on the club. Critics at the time observed that the eulogy and the death scene existed in uncomfortable tension. The speech said to remember who Chef was. The death scene spent considerable screen time making that difficult. Parker and Stone later acknowledged that they were angry about the press release, that it had called them bigots in so many words, and that the episode was in part a reaction to that. They also maintained that the Super Adventure Club framing was intended as a genuine tribute. The character had been good, an outside force had taken him away, and that outside force deserved blame more than Hayes himself did. The door was left open. At the end of the episode, members of the Super Adventure Club revived Chef's remains as Darth Chef, a Star Wars pastiche, suggesting Chef might return as a villain. Hayes died of a stroke on August 10, 2008, 10 days before what would have been his 66th birthday. He was found unresponsive in his home. Darth Chef never appeared again. In 2016, 10 years after everything described above, Isaac Hayes III spoke to The Hollywood Reporter for a piece on South Park's 20th anniversary. He said his father had not quit the show. He said someone had quit it for him. In July 2025, Hayes III spoke again at greater length, posting a comprehensive account that expanded on what he had said in 2016. He wrote that his father loved being the voice of Chef, that he loved the character, loved connecting with fans, that he would joke with people who recognized his voice in public. He wrote that his father would never have abandoned that role voluntarily. The narrative that he quit because he was offended by satire, Hayes III wrote, was a cover story created by others. His father never got to speak for himself because his health had robbed him of that chance. Stone and Parker, when asked about Hayes III's 2025 statement, confirmed that they had long suspected the truth was close to what the son had described. Stone had said in 2016 that the whole thing had sucked. Parker said they had known in their hearts that something worse was going on. Both of them had accepted a version of the story at the time that they did not fully believe because the alternative, publicly accusing a church organization of issuing an unauthorized televised resignation statement on behalf of a man who had just suffered a stroke was a significantly more complicated position to take in 2006 than it would be later. Hayes was an extraordinary figure before he ever said a word as chef. He had written Isaac Hayes was an honorary chief of a region in Ghana. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2002 and had won Grammy Awards for his work. His song from the film Shaft remains one of the most recognizable pieces of American music from the 1970s. His role as chef had genuinely revived his cultural profile in the late 1990s in a way that meant something to him. His son said he would sing chocolate salty balls at every show without hesitation. He loved that people loved Chef. What the public received in March 2006 was a story about a man walking away from something he loved because his religion had been mocked. What the evidence now suggests is a story about a man who had just lost his ability to speak, surrounded by people who held beliefs that were partly incompatible with conventional medicine, and who had a press release issued under his name by people who made decisions for him while he was incapacitated. He died 2 years later without ever having contradicted the official account, because he never recovered the capacity to do so. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of what happened to Chef is one of the darker things in South Park's real history, separate entirely from anything written in an episode. The episode that set all of it in motion, Trapped in the Closet, created consequences that went far beyond what happened to Isaac Hayes. Section 3, the episode that changed what Cartman was among all the South Park episodes. With user ratings on IMDb, one holds the highest score of any in the show's run, a 9.6, which puts it alongside some of the most praised individual episodes in the history of American television. The episode in question involves a 9-year-old boy having 2 people shot dead, grinding their bodies into chili using a hacksaw, and then feeding them to their own son at a cooking competition, while Radiohead stands nearby and tells the crying boy he is uncool. Parker and Stone have described it as one of their favorites. Critics have called it one of the best sitcom episodes of the 21st century. Rolling Stone placed a specific moment from it on a list of the most significant scenes in the show's history, and none of those descriptions, taken alone, prepare anyone for watching it the first time. The episode aired on July 11th, 2001, the same week as Super Best Friends. It was originally conceived during a production crunch as something that could be assembled quickly and might not amount to much. What it became instead was a turning point for the entire series, the episode that Parker and Stone later identified as the moment they understood what Cartman truly was. The setup is simple. Eric Cartman, 10 years old, has been told that pubic hair is something you have to grow yourself. He did not know this. He found out because he paid $16.12 to an 8th grader named Scott Tenorman in exchange for pubic hair, under the mistaken belief that acquiring it was how puberty worked. Upon learning the truth, Cartman asks for his money back. Scott refuses, laughs at him, and proceeds to further humiliate him by getting Cartman to sing a song called "I'm a Little Piggy" in front of other students in exchange for a fake promise of repayment. The money is not returned. Cartman is publicly humiliated. Scott Tenorman continues to exist, unbothered. Cartman's early attempts at revenge are catastrophically unsuccessful. He tries to get his money back through an IRS impersonation scheme, introducing himself as Chris Christopherson. He tries rallying other children to his cause with a speech borrowed from Mel Gibson's Braveheart. He tries threatening to tell his mom. Each failure adds another layer of humiliation. The audience is invited to find this funny in the way Cartman's failures are usually funny, and for most of the episode that is what it is. Cartman losing, Cartman looking stupid, Cartman being the butt of a joke for once. The audience settles into that interpretation. Parker and Stone let it settle comfortably. Cartman announces his final plan. He is going to organize a chili cook-off and invite Radiohead, who are Scott's favorite band. He has trained a pony to bite off Scott's genitals. At the cook-off, the pony will attack Scott, and Radiohead will arrive to witness the humiliation and tell Scott he is not cool. This plan, delivered earnestly by a small boy in an orange parka, is absurd enough to seem like exactly the kind of scheme Cartman would come up with. It sounds like it will go wrong. Stan and Kyle, feeling vaguely sorry for Scott, warn him about it. Scott then constructs a counterplan. He tells his parents there is a pony at a nearby farm that needs to be rescued and taken to an animal shelter. His parents leave that night to help the pony. In the meantime, Scott collects pubic hair from every kid in the school and makes a batch of chili designed to humiliate Cartman at his own cook-off. None of this is what actually happens. Cartman knew Stan and Kyle would warn Scott. He counted on it. He gave them just enough of his plan so that Scott would feel safe, would redirect his energy into the pube chili counter scheme, and would send his parents to the farm that night. What Cartman had actually done is tell Farmer Denkins, the owner of the property, that a pair of violent pony killers would be coming to his land after dark. Denkins was a redneck with a documented habit of shooting trespassers. Scott's parents arrived at the farm to rescue a pony. Denkins shot them both. Cartman then collected the bodies during the night with a hacksaw. He spent the rest of the night preparing his his contribution to the cook-off. At the ChiliCon carnival, Scott serves Cartman the pube chili, believing the trap has been sprung. Cartman tastes it, confirms that it is delicious, and reveals that he switched it with chef's chili before the contest. Then Cartman walks Scott through what actually happened, step by step, in the tone of someone who has been waiting a long time to explain a beautiful piece of work. He notes that Scott did not go to the farm himself because he was afraid of the pony. He notes that Denkins was not a man who tolerated trespassers. He asks Scott if he has enjoyed the chili. He tells Scott he named it Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman Chili. Scott reaches into the bowl. He finds his mother's finger, still wearing her ring. He realizes what he has been eating. Scott's breakdown at the cook-off is total. He collapses onto the table crying, and Cartman steps up, dancing, singing to the tune of a children's taunt that he made Scott eat his parents. At that exact moment, Radiohead appears. All 5 members voice themselves: Tom York, Johnny Greenwood, Colin Greenwood, Ed O'Brien, and Philip Selway. Matt Stone had met members of the band at a party, and the interest in participating had been mutual. The 5 of them look at Scott, collapsed and sobbing after discovering he has eaten his own parents in a bowl of chili, and tell him he is a little crybaby. They say they do not want to hang around someone who cries so much. Scott, through his devastation, manages to register that Radiohead thinks he is uncool. This registers as an additional catastrophe. Cartman watches all of it, licks up the tears running down Scott's face, and declares them delicious. The inspirations Parker and Stone drew on for the final act were not hidden. Cartman's scheme with the pony and the farmer had been compared to a scene from the film Hannibal, released earlier that year, in which a villain trains pigs to devour a specific target. The scene where Cartman receives his $16 worth of pubic hair in a box was structured as a reference to the famous box reveal in the film C7N. The final act, with Cartman feeding Scott's parents to him as a revenge dish, was directly built on Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, one of the playwright's earliest and most violent tragedies, which culminates with the protagonist serving a pie to a queen who does not know the pie is made from the remains of her own sons. Parker and Stone cited Titus as an influence explicitly. The episode folded Shakespeare's most extreme revenge scenario into a story about a 4th grader and a pubic hair sale. Parker and Stone described the episode as a milestone in 2 specific ways. First, it established what Cartman was actually capable of, moving him from a character defined by obnoxiousness and selfishness into something that required a different word. Psychopathic was the one that appeared most frequently in their subsequent descriptions. Before this episode, Cartman had been unpleasant. After it, he had engineered 2 murders and a cannibalism event before his 10th birthday. The show never walked that back. Second, the episode changed how South Park structured its stories. Earlier episodes had typically contained 2 or 3 loosely related plots that merged in the final act. Scott Tenorman Must Die ran as a single plot from beginning to end, and Parker and Stone decided afterward that one strong thread was more effective than several weak ones. The episode changed the show's architecture permanently. What the audience in 2001 could not know was that the episode had a second chapter still to come, 9 years later, buried inside the 200th and 201st episodes that would eventually be permanently banned. When Scott Tenorman returned in 2010, having spent years in a mental institution, he had decorated his obsession room as a replica of the ChiliCon carnival. He had researched Cartman in obsessive detail. He had developed a plan, and the centerpiece of his revenge was a piece of information he had uncovered about the real identity of Cartman's biological father, a mystery the show had tangled with since its earliest seasons. Jack Tenorman, Scott's father, was a former right tackle for the Denver Broncos. He had had an affair with Leanne Cartman. The town had known about it and covered it up to protect the football team during a particularly good season. Jack Tenorman was Eric Cartman's biological father. Scott and Eric Cartman were half-brothers, which meant that in the 5th season, when Cartman arranged for Farmer Denkins to shoot the trespassers at the ranch, he had unknowingly arranged for his own father to be shot, and when he ground the bodies into chili, he had unknowingly ground up his biological father and served him to his biological half-brother. Scott delivers this information to Cartman in 2010 in a manner constructed for maximum devastation. Cartman's reaction, once the information has landed, is not primarily grief about his father. It is primarily horror at the revelation that he is half ginger, given that Jack Tenorman had red hair. The show wrings considerable dark comedy from the specific thing Cartman chooses to be most upset about. He killed his own father. He made his half-brother eat him. His response is to be more bothered about the genetic implications for his hair color. Scott's position in the 2010 episodes also recontextualizes his 2001 breakdown in a way that was impossible to see coming. The image of him crying over a bowl of chili while Radiohead tells him he is a crybaby had always read as Cartman's most total victory. Revisited after the 2010 reveal, it becomes the moment a boy discovered that his parents had been murdered and fed to him by his father's secret other son, while a rock band watched. That is a different scene from the one the audience thought they were watching in 2001. The The writing in 2010 treated the earlier episode not as a completed story, but as the first act of something much longer and much darker. Parker and Stone have repeatedly listed the episode among their favorites. The IMDb rating of 9.6, voted on by the show's own audience, remains the highest of any South Park episode. Vulture named it one of the best sitcom episodes of all time. The AV Club placed it among the best sitcom episodes since 1990. Multiple critics who have written about the series at length have identified it as the point at which South Park stopped being a show about four kids doing gross things and became something harder to categorize. A comedy that could end with a 10-year-old boy dancing on a table because he successfully turned another boy's grief into a spectator sport. The Poob Seller became the most important recurring villain in the show's history. His destroyed life, built around a chili cook-off that happened because he tried to take $16 from a fourth grader, became one of the longest-running structural threads in a show that typically reset itself every week. And the boy who orchestrated it all spent the following 20-plus seasons being described by the people who made him as a sociopath, which is a word that means someone who does not experience the world the way other people do and has no particular reason to start. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The episode about Scott Tenorman changed what Cartman was capable of on screen. The next layer of the iceberg goes somewhere quieter and far more real, to a voice actress whose name most viewers never knew and whose death left a hole in the show's third season that nobody outside the production talked about for years. Section 4. The voice behind every woman credit. Sequences for South Park's first season list a voice actress named Shannon Cassidy. The name appears across every episode, attached to every female character in the show. Leanne Cartman, Wendy Testaberger, Sharon Marsh, Sheila Broflovsky, Carol McCormick, Ms. Crabtree, Mayor McDaniels, and more. One performer, one alias, covering the entire female cast of a show that was rapidly becoming one of the most watched programs on cable television. The alias was assembled from two celebrity names, Shannon Doherty and David Cassidy. It was not a name anyone was likely to look up, which was precisely the intention. Behind it was a woman named Mary Kay Bergman, and the reason for the fake name was straightforward. She was simultaneously the official voice of Snow White for Walt Disney. She had held that role since 1989, performing the character at Disney theme parks, on recordings, and in video releases, and she was worried that being publicly associated with South Park, a show that depicted animated children in graphic and explicit situations, alongside crude adult humor, might create a conflict with the most wholesome possible piece of corporate work she could have. Nobody knew whether South Park would succeed. Bergman herself said later that it was a conscious decision to stay anonymous at first, because none of them knew whether the show would be a hit, and that anyone who claimed otherwise was not being truthful. Then the show hit. The alias started receiving fan mail. They transitioned out of it partway through the second season, and her real name began appearing in the credits. Bergman had grown up in Los Angeles with an early passion for animation and performance. As a child, she had lived near Adriana Caselotti, the woman who had voiced the original Snow White in Disney's 1937 film. Bergman had reportedly grown up watching and being influenced by that proximity, and the eventual role as Snow White's successor voice carried a biographical weight that is easy to understand given that background. Getting there had not been smooth. Her first voice role was a small part in a radio commercial for a home security company in 1986. For a period, she worked part-time at a Robinson's department store while trying to build enough voiceover work to earn a living. The Snow White opportunity arrived while she was still doing that. Her boss at the store refused to give her the day off for the recording. She left the job for the session and did not go back. Disney was pleased enough with her work that she became Snow White's primary recorded voice, though she initially agreed to accept future Disney sessions only when Caselotti, then in her 80s, was unavailable. By the time South Park came along, she had already appeared in Disney features including Beauty and the Beast, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, and Mulan in various vocal capacities. When Captain Planet and the Planeteers needed to replace Meg Ryan as the voice of Dr. Blight partway through its run, Bergman was brought in and held the role for 4 seasons. That replacement work opened a specific professional niche for her, voice matching. Because she had proven she could seamlessly take over an established voice, she became someone studios called when they needed her to step in for other actresses. She performed voice matches for Jodie Foster, Gillian Anderson, Helen Hunt, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Tilly, Emma Thompson, and Alfre Woodard, among others. She was also Daphne Blake in several Scooby-Doo films from 1997 onward, and Batgirl in Batman and Mr. Freeze, Sub-Zero in 1998, and she performed the yodeling voice for the character of Jessie in Toy Story 2, released in 1999. Joan Cusack provided Jessie's speaking voice. The yodels that define the character's emotional peak were Bergman's, recorded in the final months before her death. South Park changed her professional relationship with her own identity. Before the show, her agents had struggled to get her auditions for edgy or mature projects projects because she was typecast as a sweet, gentle character actress. South Park opened a different door. She could voice a woman describing graphic sexual content in the same session where she voiced a child expressing genuine confusion about the world. The range the show demanded was one she found liberating. She credited the series with breaking her out of the category she had been locked into. She later appeared in a South Park mockumentary called Going Down to South Park as herself, speaking directly to camera about her career and the show's impact on it. What she voiced specifically across 3 seasons covered the emotional range of virtually every recurring female character the show had. Wendy Testaberger, the show's central young female character, she played as innocent and direct. Sheila Broflovsky, Kyle's mother, she built from an impression of her own Aunt Frances from New York. Leanne Cartman, Eric's permissive and peculiar mother, she based on an idea of how a 1950s housewife might sound. Ms. Crabtree, the bus driver, she played like a drill sergeant. Carol McCormick, Kenny's perpetually crying mother, she based on her own impression of Bill Clinton. Every single one of those voices came from the same person, and beyond those recurring roles, she covered dozens of additional characters, guest voices, and incidental roles across seasons 1, 2, and 3. Privately, Bergman had been managing conditions she kept hidden from nearly everyone in her life. She had bipolar disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, both of them serious, and both of them largely concealed from family members, friends, and colleagues. The concealment was not unusual for the period or the industry. For a voice actress whose entire professional value resided in the reliability and flexibility of a single instrument, conditions that affected mood, concentration, and physical symptoms carried a particular professional risk beyond the personal one. She had built a career entirely on being able to walk into a recording booth and produce any voice the director needed on the first or second take. The idea that mental health conditions might eventually compromise that ability was not abstract for her in the way it might have been for a performer in a different medium. Her mental state worsened considerably after her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Alongside the family grief that produces, she developed a specific and consuming fear that she was going to lose her voice. Her talent was the center of her professional life, the basis of a career built across hundreds of productions over more than 2 decades. The anxiety focused on that point, on the possibility that her abilities would fade or disappear, that she would become unable to do the things she had always done. People who knew her described the anxiety as occupying more and more of her thoughts in the period leading up to the end of 1999. November 11th, 1999 was a Thursday. In the morning, Bergman participated in a radio program celebrating the 45th anniversary of Disneyland. Her final new character, Rebecca Cotswolds, had been recorded for an episode called Hooked on Monkey Phonics, which aired 10 days earlier. The next South Park episode to use her voice would be one already recorded, Starvin' Marvin in Space, which was still waiting to air. She was 38 years old. She and her husband, voice actor Dino Andrade, had been married since 1990. Around 9 in the evening, she was last in contact with a friend by phone. At 10 minutes past 10, Andrade returned home with a friend and found her. She had shot herself with a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. She left 2 suicide notes. She was pronounced dead at 18 minutes past 10. Parker and Stone, who considered her a close friend and collaborator, issued a statement saying they were deeply saddened and that they preferred to grieve privately. The statement was brief. Starvin' Marvin in Space, the episode still waiting to air, was dedicated to her memory when it broadcast on November 17th, 6 days after her death. Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics, which aired the following month, carried a second dedication. The show had several episodes left in its 3rd season still to air. Episodes that had already been recorded before November 11th still contained her voice. Then the season ended and she was gone from it. Eliza Schneider had been cast before the season concluded and made her debut in the final 2 episodes, voicing the Sharon Marsh and Carol McCormick roles, as well as Ms. Crabtree. Her first appearance in those voices came in the episode Are You There, God? It's Me, Jesus. Bergman's other characters did not appear until the 4th season began, at which point the transition was complete. Mona Marshall also joined to share the workload. Several voices passed between multiple actresses across the seasons that followed. The characters remained. The woman behind them was gone. The moment where this absence became most publicly visible, though most people at the time did not register why, was the 72nd Academy Awards ceremony in March 2000. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut had been released in June 1999, and its original song Blame Canada had received a nomination for Best Original Song. Bergman had voiced Sheila Broflovsky, who sings lead on that song in the film, and the song had been released as a promotional single credited jointly to Bergman and Trey Parker. She had been considered to perform it at the ceremony. She died 4 months before the show. Robin Williams performed it instead, in tribute to her. He walked onto the Oscar stage with duct tape over his mouth, a visual reference to the song's theme of censorship. He opened by shouting the show's most famous catchphrase about Kenny. From there, he delivered the number with a full chorus of of women dressed as Canadian Mounties in the manner of a Rockettes performance, and a group of extras in South Park costumes carrying protest signs. The performance was chaotic and affectionate and enormous. The audience responded to it as comedy, which it was. Parker and Stone had asked Williams to perform specifically because of the connection to Bergman. The number that should have been hers went to one of the most celebrated comedians alive, in tribute to a woman most people in the Kodak Theater that night had never heard of. The song lost to Phil Collins' You'll Be in My Heart from Disney's Tarzan, which created a mild irony given that Bergman had been the voice of Snow White at that same Disney for the previous 10 years. Her grave at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills was marked with engravings of 3 characters: Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, and Wendy Testaberger. 3 animated drawings on a headstone, cartoon characters from a show about foul-mouthed children in Colorado, representing the professional legacy of a woman who was also the most famous iteration of the most iconic Disney princess voice. The range of that combination is not easy to find a comparison for. Her husband Dino Andrade established the Mary Kay Bergman Memorial Fund, which directed contributions toward the Suicide Prevention Center at the Didi Hirsch Community Mental Health Center in Los Angeles. He also built a website, soulgeek.com, a dating platform for self-described geeks, in her memory. She had been, by multiple accounts, a committed enthusiast of science fiction and animation who had written letters to NBC as a child attempting to save the original Star Trek from cancellation. Robin Williams, who performed Blame Canada at the Oscars as a tribute to her, died by suicide in August 2014. He was 63. The disease that Bergman had hidden and that Williams had struggled with publicly for years had claimed them both 15 years apart. What South Park's audience knew about all of this was very little. The show aired, the characters continued, the voices changed hands, and almost no one watching had any reason to think about the person whose voice had built the entire female world of the show's first 3 seasons. Her name had been hidden in its first year behind an alias. Her struggles had been hidden from most people who knew her. Her death was acknowledged in episode dedications that casual viewers might have read and forgotten. 3 seasons later, most of the characters she invented were still on screen, voiced by different people, their origins untraceable to anyone watching without specific knowledge of the history. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up is the show's relationship with the real world takes a different shape, in an episode that used the media's treatment of a real person as the material for something closer to a dark parable than a comedy. Section 5, The Ritual. Shirley Jackson wrote The Lottery in 1948, and The New Yorker published it in June of that year. Within days, readers had canceled their subscriptions in larger numbers than any fiction piece the magazine had published in its history. The story describes a small American town that holds an annual lottery. The winner is stoned to death by their neighbors while standing in a field. The town treats the event as ordinary, nearly festive. Children gather stones in advance. The killing, when it comes, is efficient and communal, performed by people who regard themselves as decent. The town's continued prosperity, in the logic of the story, depends on the ritual. No one questions it because no one has ever been asked to. What makes the story so durable as a horror text is not the violence, which occupies only a few lines. It is the normalcy of everything around the violence. The lottery box is worn and splintering. The town uses it because it has always used it, even though no one remembers why the ritual began. The people conducting the lottery feel a vague discomfort at the idea of abandoning it, but would struggle to explain what they believe would happen if they did. The ritual exists because it has existed, and the community has organized its social life around its continuation. Parker and Stone placed Britney Spears inside that story, beat by beat, and several lines of dialogue in the episode derived directly from Jackson's text. The episode aired on March 19, 2008, just 6 weeks after Britney Spears had been placed under a court-ordered conservatorship that would control her personal and financial life for the next 13 years. By the time the episode aired, the real Britney Spears had been living inside one of the most comprehensively documented public breakdowns in entertainment history for more than a year. In February 2007, she had walked into a salon in Tarzana, California, and shaved her own head with a pair of clippers while paparazzi photographed her through the windows. The salon owner, Esther Tognozzi, later revealed that one of the 2 bodyguards who had accompanied Spears to the salon repeatedly opened the window blinds during the incident. A photographer had been positioned outside, waiting. Tognozzi recalled asking the bodyguard why he kept opening the blinds when nobody was there. She found out days afterward that a photographer had been hiding specifically to capture the images. The people paid to protect Spears had been facilitating access for the people photographing her. The harvest, in whatever form it takes, requires participants at every level of the system, including those nominally tasked with protection. Days after the head shaving, Spears attacked a photographer's car with an umbrella, in another moment captured immediately, and sold across every outlet that covered celebrity news. Her custody battle with her former husband played out simultaneously in tabloids and on entertainment television. In January 2008, she was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. A month later, her father petitioned the court for emergency conservatorship and was granted it. The arrangement was intended as temporary. It lasted until November 2021. The episode opens with the boys forced to watch a political debate between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. A breaking news bulletin interrupts. Britney Spears has been spotted near South Park, and a photographer has already been paid $100,000 for a photo of her urinating on a ladybug. Cartman immediately recognizes the economic logic. Butters, from the beginning, argues they should leave her alone. His objection is overruled. The boys go to find her. They get past security by pretending to be her children. Britney, who has been hiding from cameras and believes for a moment that her actual children have arrived, discovers the deception. She has been exhausted and hunted and used and lied to. She takes a shotgun and shoots herself in the head. She survives, but with only the bottom half of her face remaining. Her eyes are gone. Most of her head is gone. She cannot speak. Cartman and Butters leave the room immediately. This is worth noting. Cartman, who arranges for the parents of a classmate to be killed and ground into chili, finds the scene in Britney's hotel room too much and walks out. He does not participate in what follows. Parker and Stone use the character most associated with the show's darkness as the moral baseline for this particular episode, and even he cannot go where the episode goes next. Stan and Kyle stay. They feel responsible. When they attempt to smuggle Britney out of the hospital through a back exit, one of the paparazzi spots them and emits a long, piercing wail, pointing directly at the fleeing group. The sound and behavior is an exact reproduction of the pod people from the 1978 science fiction film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in which creatures that have replaced human beings alert each other to the presence of uninfected people. The episode uses the gesture for a specific reason. The paparazzi are not ordinary people behaving badly. They are something that has replaced ordinary people, running on a different logic, oriented entirely toward extracting the image at any cost. The scream identifies Britney not as a person in distress, but as a target who is attempting to leave the field. Stan and Kyle spend the episode attempting to outrun this system. They eventually board a train heading north toward the North Pole. The episode shifting at this point into a parody of the 1969 animated television special Frosty the Snowman, complete with a narrator speaking in the measured, gentle tones of a holiday film. The contrast between that narrator's warmth and what is actually happening to the animated Britney Spears sitting on the train is where the episode's horror lives most specifically. Parker and Stone used the structural frame of a children's Christmas special to tell a story about a woman being hunted to death. The warmth of the Frosty parody is not incidental. It represents how the coverage of celebrity destruction is packaged, as entertainment, as spectacle, in a format that feels communal and comfortable. Throughout the episode, characters repeatedly urge others to leave Britney alone. The phrase is a direct reference to a 2007 viral video in which a young man posted an emotional defense of Spears, begging the public and the media to stop pursuing her. That video had become the subject of parody and mockery. The earnest plea itself turned into a joke. The episode acknowledges the video exists without endorsing the mockery. Parker and Stone include the phrase as the correct instinct that nobody in the episode, except Butters, actually follows. The media commentary during the pursuit is relentless. Reporters analyze Britney's disfigured appearance in the language normally used for celebrity fashion choices. They speculate about what her missing face says about her mental state. She performs a concert with half a head, and the audience reviews it as a comeback. The show never breaks character on the media coverage. The commentary continues as if nothing unusual has occurred, because within the episode's logic, nothing has. The structural frame Parker and Stone borrowed from extends beyond the basic premise. The plot had Cartman arguing that if Family Guy could be pressured into self-censoring by the threat of violence, then violent threats would simply become a useful tool for silencing anything. Several lines of dialogue in the episode are lifted from the Jackson story. The townspeople know something the audience does not know yet, and they are protecting it. Kyle is the first to understand the truth. The townspeople have not been hounding Britney because they enjoy it, or because celebrity gossip is profitable, though both of those things are also true. They have been doing it because American society requires a sacrifice. Every year, the culture selects a young woman in the public eye and pursues her until she is destroyed, and the destruction is what makes the harvest good. The ancient mechanism has simply been updated. Instead of gathering stones, people buy tabloids. Instead of a field, they have entertainment television and paparazzi who pay bodyguards to open salon blinds. The outcome is the same. The corn grows. Kyle confronts the crowd and tells them that what they are doing is wrong. A paparazzo explains that she has to die. Kyle asks why. The paparazzo explains the harvest. It is not framed as a joke. The townspeople are entirely sincere. They are not cruel people in any other context. They simply need the harvest to be good. Britney is photographed to death at the North Pole. The crowd surrounds her, flashbulbs firing, and she falls and does not get up. The crowd responsible includes familiar South Park residents, presents Randy Marsh, Sharon, Sheila Broflovsky, Gerald, Grandpa Marsh, Officer Barbrady. The full social fabric of the show's world is present. Parker and Stone populated the mob with every recurring character from the show's regular cast. Nobody in South Park is exempt from the mechanism. The episode cuts to the supermarket afterward. The corn harvest has been exceptional. A news segment announces the rapid rise of a young performer named Miley Cyrus, star of Hannah Montana. Randy says that the next harvest will be even better. The townspeople begin to sing, a low communal sound, the same note the episode has been building toward. Stan and Kyle are in the supermarket. They roll their eyes. They join the song. The show's prediction about Miley Cyrus was not prescient in the way some of its apparent coincidences are. It was an observation about a pattern applied to the most obvious next candidate available in 2008. Cyrus's transition from Hannah Montana into something more adult and more provocative became the subject of extensive media speculation, derision, and the specific language of personal failure between 2012 and 2014. The coverage focused on her body, her choices, and what the transition said about her character, in the same registers the episode had described for Britney. The cycle the episode outlined ran again with the next person in the position. Stan and Kyle joining the chant is the most disturbing choice the episode makes. Through everything that has come before, they have been the moral center, the characters trying to pull Britney out of what is happening to her. At the end, having failed, they stop trying. They become part of it. The show offers no resolution where they maintain their integrity against the tide. The crowd absorbs them. This is what the episode believes, that the mechanism is powerful enough to pull everyone in, including the people who can see it clearly, once enough time has passed, and the resistance costs too much. The episode received mixed critical reception when it aired. Some reviewers found the central metaphor apt, but the execution uneven. Others found it too disturbing to function as comedy in the traditional sense. Parker and Stone acknowledged in DVD commentary that the episode was not built to be funny in the way most South Park episodes were built to be funny. They were placing a specific real person inside a specific short story and watching what happened. In February 2021, the New York Times released a documentary called Framing Britney Spears. The documentary examined the conservatorship, the media coverage leading up to it, and the broader cultural conditions that had made the coverage possible. It sparked significant public reconsideration of the 2007 and 2008 period, and many people who revisited it noted that South Park's episode from 2008 had described the mechanics of that coverage more accurately than most contemporary journalism had. The episode's thesis, that the media was performing a ritual destruction on a young woman for communal benefit while calling it entertainment, had arrived at that conclusion 13 years before it became a mainstream critical position. In June 2021, Spears addressed a Los Angeles court in open testimony for the first time in the conservatorship's existence. Her statement ran for more than 20 minutes and was broadcast publicly after she demanded the proceedings not be sealed. She described being compelled to work against her will, being subjected to involuntary psychiatric evaluations when she objected to a piece of choreography, being forced to take birth control against her wishes. She said the conservatorship was doing her more harm than good. She told the court she wanted her life back. The conservatorship was terminated in November 2021, 13 years after it began. The South Park episode from 2008 had not known the specific details that would emerge in 2021. It had described a general mechanism, a system that selected a woman, stripped her of control, and called the stripping necessary, while continuing to profit from the coverage of her condition. The people photographing Britney to death in the episode's climax, the crowd that included Randy and Sharon and Sheila, and the full population of South Park's world, were not monsters. They were people who needed the harvest to be good, and who had found a way to make it happen that felt like entertainment, rather than what it was. Jackson's story was never really about a lottery. It was about how ordinary communities maintain extraordinary cruelties by simply not examining them. Parker and Stone made the same argument in 2008, and the court record from 2021 confirmed they had been describing something real. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Britney episode works as an iceberg entry because what looks on the surface like a dark comedy about celebrity culture is carrying a specific literary argument about sacrifice and complicity that the show rarely gets credit for. Below that layer sits an episode that did something different again, taking the show's most specific and deliberate swing at a foreign government and watching the government respond in real time. Section 6, Banned in China. On the plane to China, Randy Marsh looked around the cabin and realized he was not the first person to have this idea. Every seat around him was occupied by Disney characters. Mickey Mouse was there, along with others from the studio's library. Each of them was on the same trip for the same reason, to sell their content in China and collect from the largest market in the world. Randy, who had come up with the plan himself and believed it to be original, sat quietly in the middle of them and understood that the idea of going to China for money had been well established long before he arrived at it. This moment, lasting seconds in in the episode contained the argument that Banned in China was going to spend the next 20 minutes making. The episode aired on October 2nd, 2019 as the 299th installment of the series. Within a week, every trace of South Park had been removed from the Chinese internet. Not reduced, not filtered, removed. The episode ran two storylines simultaneously. In the first, Randy travels to China to expand his marijuana business, is arrested at customs when the weed is discovered in his luggage, and is sentenced to a prison work camp. The camp is depicted as a place of summary executions, slave labor, and Communist Party re-education sessions. A guard shocks Randy with electricity. Randy reads from a card that the party is more important than the individual. He witnesses a prisoner being shot in the head. These scenes were not exaggerated beyond what human rights organizations had documented about the detention facilities China had been operating in Xinjiang province, holding as many as 1 million people from ethnic minority groups for political indoctrination. The show depicted them as a prison camp because reporting from multiple international organizations had described them as such. Randy endures the conditions and attempts to scheme his way out. In the camp, he encounters Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, both also imprisoned. The reason Winnie the Pooh was in a Chinese prison required no explanation for anyone following online culture in 2013 or after. That year, a comparison between photographs of Xi Jinping walking alongside Barack Obama and a photo of Winnie the Pooh alongside Tigger had circulated on Chinese social media. The images were visually similar enough to make the joke land. The comparison spread. Chinese censors began targeting and removing images of the cartoon bear from platforms, and by 2017, the character had been effectively banned from Chinese social media. A film featuring the character, a live-action version released in 2018, was denied a Chinese distribution license with no official explanation. In the episode, Piglet tells Randy that some people said Pooh looked like the Chinese president, so they are now illegal. Randy asks what kind of madhouse this is. The episode was recording what had actually happened. The second plotline ran parallel. Stan's death metal band, Crimson Dawn, gets noticed by a music industry producer who explains that records and tours are no longer financially viable, but biopics are everywhere. The band agrees to a biopic. A Chinese studio representative joins the production team. The representative begins suggesting changes. Nothing politically sensitive can remain. The biopic's approved subject matter becomes increasingly narrow. Characters cannot be identified as belonging to groups or nationalities that might cause discomfort. The script requires revisions to remove any reference to Winnie the Pooh, any depiction of homosexuality, any mention of organ transplants, and any suggestion that America is a free country. Two Chinese officials eventually arrive on set to oversee the production directly. This list of prohibited content was not invented for comic effect. Bohemian Rhapsody, the Oscar-winning biographical film about Freddie Mercury and the band Queen, was released in China in early 2019 with at least 10 scenes removed. The scenes that disappeared were those that depicted Mercury's sexuality most directly, including a kiss with a male partner and the film's depiction of his gay relationships generally. Chinese audiences who had seen the film elsewhere and then watched the Chinese version reported that entire sections of the character's identity had been made to vanish. The episode of South Park that parodied Chinese censorship removing depictions of homosexuality from biopics aired in October 2019, months after this had actually occurred. The joke was not ahead of reality, it was describing reality. The Red Dawn remake from 2012 had been shot with China as the invading country. Studio executives reviewed the finished film and became concerned about Chinese market access. The villains were digitally altered in post-production at a reported cost of under $1 million, and the film was released with North Korea as the antagonist instead. Marvel's Doctor Strange in 2016 had cast the traditionally Tibetan character of the Ancient One as a white woman from Celtic origin, with the film's writer acknowledging directly that the Tibetan identity had been changed because Tibet's political status would have created problems with Chinese distribution. Top Gun: Maverick's promotional trailer in 2019 showed Tom Cruise's character wearing a jacket with the flag of Taiwan, which had appeared on the same jacket in the original 1986 film. The jacket in the trailer had the flag replaced with a different, unspecific design. Stan's line in the episode, delivered while staring at his rewritten script, was that the only movies American kids go see anymore are ones approved by the Chinese Communist Party. Parker and Stone wrote that line, and the episode's entire biopic subplot during the same year all of the above had already happened. A line of dialogue in the episode, delivered by a music producer, described the situation plainly. A character told Stan that he would have to lower his ideals of freedom if he wanted to suck on the warm teat of China. Stan eventually stops. He says he cannot sell his soul this way. He says it is not worth living in a world where China controls the art of another country. Randy, meanwhile, finds Mickey Mouse inside the prison camp. Mickey Mouse in the episode is portrayed as a cheerful, corporate sociopath willing to do anything the Chinese market requires. When Randy initially criticizes the the Chinese government for the way it treats its prisoners, Mickey confronts him furiously about the business he is losing. Randy holds his position. Mickey and Randy eventually approach the Chinese officials together to pitch the marijuana deal, and the officials reject it. Mickey attributes the rejection to the Winnie the Pooh problem. The bear's mere presence, even imprisoned, is creating a difficulty that needs to be resolved. Randy decides to resolve it. He lures Winnie the Pooh into a dark alley using honey and strangles him to death with garrote wire. Piglet watches. The murder was shot as a direct parody of a killing scene in the Coen brothers film No Country for Old Men, staged with the same camera framing and the same clinical absence of music. The episode chose one of the most respected American crime films of the prior decade as its visual reference for the moment when Randy kills a beloved children's cartoon character to secure market access. Later, at the family dinner table, Stan notices Randy is covered in honey and blood and asks what happened. Randy confirms he killed Winnie the Pooh. Stan quietly gets up from the table and leaves to write another song about his father. The episode treated this revelation as a natural extension of Randy's character, a man who blows up competing marijuana farmers and now kills cartoon bears, all in the name of business integrity. At exactly the same moment that the episode was airing, the NBA was experiencing its own version of the same argument. Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, had posted a tweet expressing support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. The tweet was deleted within hours. Chinese broadcasters announced they would stop airing Rockets games. Local Chinese sponsors pulled funding from both the team and the league. The NBA distanced itself from Morey's words and indicated through various statements that it valued its relationship with China and regretted any offense caused. LeBron James, the league's most prominent player and one of its most vocal figures on social justice issues, spoke to reporters about the controversy before a preseason game. He told them he believed Morey was either misinformed or not really educated on the situation. He said so many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but emotionally, physically, and spiritually. He suggested Morey could have waited a week before sending the tweet. James's comments generated immediate backlash from politicians, journalists, and fans who noted that the player had been in China for exhibition games days earlier and had direct financial interests in the Chinese market. James later posted on social media, attempting to clarify his position, but the core of his statement had already been widely covered. James Harden, a Rockets player who had significant personal endorsement deals in China, separately appeared in front of cameras in China and said he and the team were apologetic. South Park's episode had been written before the Morey tweet. The parallel between what the episode depicted, American public figures choosing Chinese market access over other considerations, and what the NBA was doing in real time, landed with the kind of precision that looked designed but was the product of the show's accelerated production schedule intersecting with a story that had been building for years. Parker and Stone's response to being banned from China arrived on Monday, October 7th, 5 days after the episode aired. It was posted on the show's official social media under the title of an official apology to China. The full text was brief and is paraphrasable as follows. They welcomed the Chinese censors into their homes and hearts, just as the NBA had done. They too loved money more than freedom and democracy. They affirmed that the Chinese president bore no resemblance to Winnie the Pooh. They encouraged viewers to watch the upcoming 300th episode. They offered their congratulations to the great Communist Party of China, and they asked whether the agricultural harvest would be good that autumn. The statement closed by asking China if they were good now. The statement referenced the sorghum harvest, which is a Chinese crop. It was not written for a Chinese audience. It was written for an American audience watching the NBA simultaneously apologize in corporate language for the crime of having a general manager with an opinion about Hong Kong. The contrast between the two approaches was as deliberate as anything in the episode itself. The NBA was one of the most powerful sports organizations in the world, with decades of Chinese business relationships and billions of dollars in exposure. South Park was an animated comedy about children in Colorado. One of them chose the market. One of them published a statement asking China if they were good now. South Park remained scrubbed from the Chinese internet in its entirety. A search of Weibo, the Chinese social media platform most analogous to Twitter, returned no mentions of the show at all. Not critical mentions, not positive ones. Clips and episodes on the streaming services Youku and iQIYI were listed but would not play. Searches on Baidu returned nothing. Fan pages and discussion boards had been cleared. The Hollywood Reporter noted in November 2019 that the show had not reappeared anywhere. China had made the decision efficiently and completely. South Park had no relationship with the Chinese market to lose. The show had never been officially licensed or distributed there. The ban cost the show exactly nothing in revenue. This was the irreducible advantage that Parker and Stone held in the exchange. They had nothing in China to protect. They were not the NBA, which had 20 years of business development and massive financial infrastructure at stake. They were not Disney, which had films requiring Chinese box office performance and theme parks operating in the country. They were not a streaming service, a clothing brand, or a technology company. The Chinese ban on South Park cost Parker and Stone a potential future market that they had not been exploiting. The statement asking whether they were good now was funny in the specific way that only powerlessness can make something funny, because the answer was obviously no, and because the answer did not matter to them. 10 days after the episode aired, the German DJ and producer Zed announced on social media that he had been permanently banned from China. His offense was liking a tweet from the official South Park account. The tweet he had liked was not political. It was a birthday announcement celebrating the show's upcoming 300th episode, asking fans to share their favorite episodes. It had a gif of a birthday cake. Liking that tweet had been enough. His publicist confirmed the ban to press. The precise parameters of the ban were unclear, whether it was a travel restriction, a platform block, or something else, but the fact of it was verified. Zed had committed no act of political speech. He had engaged with the social media account of a television show, and the engagement had been noticed. The Zed situation illustrated the scope of what the episode had been describing. The argument of banned in China was not that China was occasionally inconvenient for American creative industries, but that the influence extended further than the obvious and well-documented cases. Every entity with Chinese market presence had a reason to be cautious, which meant the zone of caution extended well beyond anything explicitly required. A DJ who hoped to perform in China in the future had a reason to avoid liking certain tweets. A film studio with a franchise operating in the Chinese market had a reason to remove certain scenes before the Chinese release. A clothing brand had a reason to ensure its products' labels did not indicate specific geographical positions on contested territories. The episode was describing a system of self-censorship that operated before any explicit demand was made, because everyone involved understood the cost of getting it wrong. Stan's final refusal in the episode, his decision to abandon the biopic rather than keep rewriting it to match what the Chinese representatives would approve, was the show's stated position. The episode ended with the Randy plotline delivering its darkest punchline, but the Stan plotline delivered the statement Parker and Stone were making about themselves. They could not sell their soul this way. Anyone who would betray their ideals to make money in China was not worth a lick of spit. These were lines they wrote and then immediately demonstrated they meant by releasing an episode they knew would get them banned from a market they had never entered. South Park was not available in China before banned in China. South Park is not available in China now. The ban changed nothing about the show's reach in any other territory. The episode remains on streaming platforms everywhere the show is available. The statement asking China if they were good now was a statement that already knew the answer, and the answer was no, and the answer was fine. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Banned in China episode is what happens when a show with nothing to lose takes a position that every show with something to lose has avoided. The next layer down covers territory that is harder to laugh at, an episode that treated school shootings as a background noise problem, and used that framing to say something that landed differently depending on whether the audience understood what it was actually looking at. Section 7. Dead Kids South Park Elementary's math test was already underway when the shooting started. Mrs. Nelson stood at the front of the classroom, handing back graded papers, explaining which questions the students had gotten wrong and how to approach them correctly. Gunfire and screaming began in the hallway outside. The teacher continued. The students continued. A SWAT team member entered the classroom, assessed the situation, and left. Cartman complained to the teacher that Tolkien had deliberately changed his answers after Cartman had copied them, causing Cartman to fail. Nobody in the room treated any of this as unusual. The shooting sounds eventually faded. The class wrapped up. The students walked out of the building through the police cordon and the paramedics and the reporters, the way students walk through any crowded area, stepping around the activity without engaging it. The 22nd season of South Park opened on September 26, 2018, with this scene. 7 months earlier, on February 14th, 17 students and staff members had been killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. It had been the 17th incident in which a gun was fired at a school or college in the first 45 days of 2018. The massacre had lasted 6 minutes and 20 seconds. That duration became specific and documented at the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. on March 24th, when a student named Emma Gonzalez walked to the podium, read the names of her 17 dead classmates and teachers, and the things each of them would never do again, and then stopped speaking. She stood at the microphone for 4 minutes and 25 seconds in complete silence, tears running down her face, while the crowd around her gradually fell quiet. When a timer went off, she said that since she had walked out on stage, it had been 6 minutes and 20 seconds, which was the time it had taken a gunman to end 17 lives. She told the crowd to fight for their lives before it was someone else's job, and left the stage. Hundreds of thousands of people had attended the DC March alone, with more than 800 parallel events worldwide. 6 months later, South Park opened its new season with a classroom full of children continuing their math review while bullets flew through the adjacent hallway. By September 26, 26, 2018, the date Dead Kids aired, there had been 36 school shooting incidents in the United States in 2018 alone. The episode is called Dead Kids. The dead kids are not the subject is the lack of reaction to them. Between the 2007-2008 school year and the 2017-2018 school year, the proportion of American public schools conducting active shooter drills had risen from 40% to 95%. Over 4 million students experienced at least one lockdown drill during the 2017-2018 school year alone. Research published after the episode aired found that active shooter drills were associated with a 39 to 42% increase in depression and stress and anxiety in students who participated in them, and a 23% increase in other mental health concerns in the 90 days following a drill. The drills had become so embedded in American school life by 2018 that teachers and students had developed the muscle memory of continuing to function during them. South Park Elementary's math class continuing during a shooting was not pure absurdism. It was an exaggerated version of what active shooter training was designed to produce. Sharon Marsh runs to meet her son outside the school after the first shooting. She is visibly distressed, shaking, pulling Stan away from the scene. At dinner that night, Sharon asks Stan to tell his father what happened at school. Stan assumes she means his math grade and begins discussing the test. Sharon corrects him. He says, "Oh, the shooting," and mentions it casually. Randy's immediate response is to confirm that Stan was neither the shooter nor a victim. Having confirmed this, Randy drops the subject and goes back to asking about the math test. Sharon shouts that children died at that school, that they were killed in a place where they were supposed to be safe. Randy suggests she might be on her period. This is the engine of the episode. Randy is not portrayed as a villain. He is not even portrayed as unusually callous. He represents the median response. His concern, expressed to his male friends in a separate scene, is that he turns on the television dreading the announcement of another school shooting because it is going to set Sharon off again. He tells them he loves Sharon and that he is so worried about her. His relationship with the shootings is mediated entirely through their effect on his domestic life. The shootings themselves register as a background condition, something that exists the way weather exists, outside of anyone's control and therefore not worth emotional investment. Sharon's emotional investment is the aberration. Her grief is pathologized. The school administration implements active shooter protocols. Security consultants are hired. Ballistic equipment is discussed. PC principal manages communications with parents. Every institutional response to the shootings is carefully organized around managing the existence of shootings without examining their cause or reducing their frequency. The episode's school is portrayed as a place where shootings have happened often enough that the administrative response is practiced and smooth. Nobody improvises. The procedures are in place. Sharon invites all the parents over to discuss what is happening at the school. She presents it as an emergency requiring collective response. The assembled parents look at her with the mild concern people give to someone who has become emotional in an unwarranted way. One of them gently suggests she might want to talk to someone. The parents have collectively installed Sharon as the outlier, the one person whose reaction to children being killed registers as excessive. She shouts at them that she is asking why nobody sees what is happening, why they are all acting like this is normal. Nobody answers her directly. They look at each other. The scene is set to the song Where Do I Begin, the Andy Williams recording from the early 1970s, a lush orchestral piece about a love so vast it has no beginning point. The contrast between the song's sweeping warmth and the content of Sharon's despair is not played for comedy. It is played as the kind of feeling that has nowhere to go. Randy, by the episode's second shooting, has sought professional help for Sharon. He brings her to a therapist and plays a charades game with the therapist to convey what he believes Sharon's diagnosis is. The word he is trying to convey is menopause. The therapist watches Randy perform charades in a clinical setting and tries to guess. This scene is the episode's most explicit statement about institutional response. The system has been mobilized not to address the thing Sharon is actually upset about, but to reclassify her response as a medical condition requiring management. The Cartman subplot runs parallel to all of this. He has failed a math test. He becomes convinced that Tolkien deliberately changed his test answers after Cartman copied them. He further convinces himself that Tolkien did this because Cartman had not seen Black Panther, meaning Tolkien believes Cartman is racist, meaning this is now about race. Cartman's investigation into this alleged conspiracy takes him through the school during multiple shootings. He treats the shootings as inconvenient obstacles to his pursuit of the real problem, which is his math grade. Parker and Stone made a deliberate structural choice with the Cartman subplot. It is designed to be absurd and completely disconnected from any genuine stakes. By 2018, Black Panther had become one of the most culturally significant film releases in years, a major point of cultural conversation occupying significant media and social space. Cartman's fixation on the film and the social politics around it mirrors the media attention surrounding it. The gap between Cartman's concerns and what is happening around him is is the joke, and the joke is not funny in the usual sense. The episode places two parallel stories in the same building, one about children being killed and adults failing to respond, and one about a child conducting a paranoid investigation into a Marvel film. The attention economy that made the Marvel discourse enormous is the same attention economy that allowed the school shooting story to cycle through and drain away. Cartman's subplot is a structural argument, not a comedic diversion. The episode repeats its central beat multiple times. A shooting occurs. Class continues. The boys walk out. Sharon reacts. Randy dismisses the reaction. The beat runs again, then again. Parker and Stone were often criticized for repetition in later seasons, but the repetition here is load-bearing. The episode is trying to replicate the feeling of reading about the same event in the news multiple times without anything changing. The shootings do not escalate. They do not produce consequences. They occur and are absorbed. The repetition of the beat in the episode mirrors the repetition of the news cycle without any structural resolution. Comedy Central had begun teasing the season on September 13th, 2018, almost 2 weeks before the premiere. The campaign used the hashtag and phrase "Cancel South Park," appearing on billboards in Los Angeles, in white letters on black backgrounds. The formatting resembled actual cancellation announcements. It was an advertisement designed to look like its own criticism. The show's history of attracting cancellation demands had become a marketing device. The hashtag then appeared in the episode's end credits, visible in the background of the scene, acknowledging that the campaign was the campaign. Parker has said that people have been talking about canceling South Park for decades, and the show has never stopped. The marketing campaign using cancellation language for a show about school shootings, premiering in the year of Parkland, carried a specific tension that the campaign itself did not address. The shows that get canceled are the ones that cross lines. The line, in 2018, was not school shootings made into comedy. The episode was not canceled. Nobody asked for it to be pulled. That fact is part of what the episode was demonstrating. Sharon, by the episode's end, has broken. She apologizes to Randy. She agrees that she has been overreacting. She tells him she thinks he might be right, that her emotions have been running high, and that perhaps she needs to be more measured. Randy, genuinely moved, is grateful. He loves her. He was so worried. He cradles her in relief. At that moment, the phone rings. It is the school. Stan has been shot in a 5th shooting. Sharon and Randy receive the news with the same calm they receive any standard piece of information. The episode ends there. It offers no further commentary. Sharon finally achieved what the town wanted. She stopped treating the shootings as an emergency. She accomplished this exactly at the moment that the shootings directly hit her own family. Critical reception was divided in ways that illuminate what the episode was doing and how it was being received. IndieWire praised its irreverence about mass shooting fatigue, but noted that the single premise repeated without significant variation. The AV Club called it intriguing but uneven. Vulture gave it a harsh rating, arguing that the satire garbled its intent by prioritizing the comedic mechanism over anything that challenged viewer complacency directly. Den of Geek found the opening scene genuinely unsettling, but felt the period joke structure was a lazy choice given the subject matter. Forbes noted that the episode was a spot-on depiction of the current situation. The disagreement in those reviews reflects the genuine difficulty of what the episode was attempting. The argument it was making was not that school shootings are funny, it was that the absence of a sustained national response to school shootings is a kind of collective irrationality that operates on the Randy Marsh scale, not cartoonishly evil, not stupid, but genuinely convinced that the person in the room treating the crisis as a crisis is the one with the problem. That argument lands differently depending on where the viewer stands. For someone who had followed the post-Parkland coverage cycle and watched the national conversation move on from each subsequent shooting within days, the Randy characterization was recognizable in a way that was not comfortable. The March in March had brought hundreds of thousands of people into the streets. 6 months later, the premiere of an animated television show opened with a classroom of children continuing their math review during a shooting, and the most disturbing thing in the episode was not the shooting. It was Sharon eventually going quiet. The structure of the episode as an Iceberg entry is that the first reading of Dead Kids is a school shooting satire that uses normalization as its central joke. The shooting happens, class continues, this is funny because it is absurd. The second reading is that the episode has accurately modeled what American society was actually doing. The shooting happened. The shootings kept happening. Various institutional responses were organized. Sharon Marsh was dismissed as hormonal. By September 2018, 36 incidents into the year, the season premiere of a comedy show aired an episode about how school shootings had become background noise, and the episode's most resonant moment was a woman accepting that her emotional response to children being killed was a medical irregularity requiring treatment. The episode did not invent that mechanism, it observed it. Parker and Stone did not publicly comment at length on the episode after it aired. The show moved to the next episode. By the following week, Dead Kids had largely cycled out of the conversation, which is its own kind of data point. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Dead Kids operated on the principle that the most disturbing satire describes what is already happening. Below that entry on the iceberg sits a set of episodes where the show did not describe what was happening, but appeared to have seen it coming, in specific and verifiable ways that critics and viewers have been tallying ever since. Section 8. What South Park saw coming in 2002. South Park aired an episode called Jared Has AIDS. The episode centered on a word that sounded like another word. Jared Fogle, the real Subway spokesman who had become famous for losing over 200 pounds eating the chain's sandwiches, visits South Park to promote his weight loss. He admits that his success was not purely from sandwiches. He had help from personal assistants, people he called his aides. The town hears AIDS and understands AIDS. The episode's joke ran entirely on that phonetic gap, with the town cycling through growing horror at the implications of what Jared appeared to be confessing, while Jared remained completely confused about why everyone kept reacting so badly to a word that described his support staff. Fogle later told press he found the episode flattering. An entire South Park episode devoted to him meant he had made it, he said. His representatives confirmed he was not offended. He described the humor as typical South Park, meaning tasteless but ultimately just a joke about a word that sounded like a disease. In 2015, Jared Fogle pleaded guilty in federal court to charges of distributing and possessing child pornography and traveling to engage in unlawful sexual activity with minors. The FBI had found on his devices thousands of sexually explicit images and videos involving children, including material sent to him by the director of the Jared Foundation, his own charity. Text messages on his phone contained conversations about accessing children through his charitable work. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and will not be eligible for release until 2029 at the earliest. Parker and Stone had not predicted child sex abuse. The 2002 episode was a pun. What happened afterward was that the show's instinct to find the most grotesque possible version of a public figure's persona landed 13 years in advance on something close to the actual truth of the person it was satirizing. When season 19 of South Park aired in 2015, after the conviction, the show depicted Jared at a university campus fraternity event, specifically attempting to chase down refugee children. The scene was brief and not elaborated on. The show acknowledged what had happened to the real person and incorporated it into a single gag. The 2002 episode, in retrospect, had been a comedy about misunderstanding. The 2015 scene was a different kind of joke entirely. Jared Fogle is not the only public figure toward whom the show's satirical instincts moved in a direction that turned out to be closer to documented truth than anyone watching the original episodes had understood. Bill Cosby appeared in South Park's fourth season, in the year 2000, in an episode called Trapper Keeper. A man traveling from the future uses the alias Bill Cosby to infiltrate Cartman's life and gain access to a device he needs to prevent from causing a catastrophe. When the man first approaches Cartman and attempts to befriend him, Cartman declines. He says his mom told him he is not supposed to have male friends over 30, adding that he got burned on that front once before. The line was written as a reference to an earlier episode involving a different storyline about adult predators. In 2000, with Cosby still understood publicly as a wholesome television figure, the line read as a mild joke about children's appropriate caution around adults. After 2014, when more than 50 women had publicly accused Cosby of sexual assault, the line became a very different sentence. The December 2014 season finale took the Cosby material further. The episode, called Happy Holograms, featured a hologram of Cosby appearing alongside Taylor Swift for a holiday special, performing a duet on Baby It's Cold Outside, the song whose lyrics have long been analyzed as a portrait of coercion. In the episode's version, Cosby spells out that there is Jell-O in the drink, referencing the drugstore brand he had advertised for decades and the specific method multiple accusers had described. The episode aired on December 10, 2014. Supermodel Beverly Johnson went public with her account of Cosby drugging her shortly after the episode aired. Parker and Stone had been working from the same body of allegations that had been surfacing over weeks in the weeks before the finale aired, and had built a scene directly depicting what accusers were describing, at the exact moment the broader public was first processing those descriptions. The episode's speed of production meant it could engage with the Cosby allegations in the same week they were generating news. The show did not predict the allegations. It incorporated them almost in real time. The explanation that applies to many of the show's apparent predictions is its production model. Parker and Stone write, animate, voice, and deliver episodes in roughly 6 days. This schedule means the show absorbs breaking news as it happens, rather than working months ahead of an air date. An event that occurs on Monday can plausibly be in the episode airing Wednesday. The schedule creates genuine coincidences, because the show is pulling from the same current events its audience is living through, and sometimes the current event advances further in real life after the episode has already been written, but before it airs. The coincidence is the gap between between those two moments. July 7th, 1999 is when the Sexual Harassment Panda episode first aired. In it, a school official arrives in a panda costume to teach the students about sexual harassment law. The lesson immediately triggers an epidemic of lawsuits. Students sue each other for minor verbal incidents. Lawyers become wealthy. The school goes nearly bankrupt. The panda loses his job as a result of the legal chaos he initiated. The episode was a comedy about how sexual harassment awareness programs become lawsuit-generating machines that serve lawyers rather than victims. Parker and Stone were making fun of corporate sensitivity training and liability culture. The phrase "Me Too" was first used in this specific context in 2006 by activist Tarana Burke. The hashtag version emerged in October 2017 when the Harvey Weinstein allegations sparked a cascade of public disclosures across multiple industries. The Sexual Harassment Panda episode had aired in 1999, 7 years before Burke's original formulation and 18 years before the hashtag version changed the public landscape around these disclosures. The episode's specific portrait of institutional sexual harassment education generating legal chaos without addressing underlying conditions was cited by workplace experts writing about Me Too coverage in 2018. The panda had been wrong about the mechanism, but correct about the gap between what the training promised and what it produced. The episode called Put It Down aired on September 20th, 2017 as the 21st season's second episode. The plot involved President Garrison, the show's version of Donald Trump, sending a series of escalating tweets at North Korea in response to a child sending Kim Jong-un cupcakes as a peace gesture. Each tweet from the fictional president worsened the situation. One told North Korea to go ahead and bomb South Park if they wanted. The character sent inflammatory social media messages that pulled the town into an international crisis, while the adults around him remained absorbed in their phones and the children panicked about nuclear war. Trump had already been tweeting about North Korea in the week before the episode aired. His messages were the inspiration. What happened after the episode aired is where the coincidence arrives. In the days following the September 20th broadcast, Trump posted a threat on social media that North Korea would not be around much longer. The fictional president had goaded North Korea to attack. The real president posted a statement asserting North Korea's imminent non-existence. The episode had depicted one direction of escalation. The real escalation that followed moved in the same direction. November 7th, 2001 was the date of the first South Park episode to air after the September 11th attacks. The episode, aired less than 2 months after the attacks, sent the boys to Afghanistan through a bureaucratic postal error and eventually placed Cartman in direct confrontation with Osama bin Laden. The episode's tone was deliberately absurdist. The bin Laden sequences were structured as a Looney Tunes parody, with Cartman playing Bugs Bunny to bin Laden's Elmer Fudd, employing cartoon logic and prop gags while bin Laden chased him. At the episode's end, bin Laden was blown up with dynamite and then shot in the head by an American soldier. The episode made this seem inevitable and slightly silly. Bin Laden was killed by American Special Operations Forces in Abbottabad, Pakistan on May 2nd, 2011, almost exactly a decade after the episode aired. Comedy Central re-aired the episode the night of the killing. The prediction in this case was not really a prediction in the strict sense. The United States government had made bin Laden's death a stated objective immediately after the September 11th attacks. Parker and Stone, writing a satire about American responses to terrorism 2 months after those attacks, incorporated the obvious endpoint of the political situation as their episode's conclusion. What made it feel like a prediction was the decade between the episode and the event. An episode called Gluten-Free Ebola aired on October 1st, 2014. The title was a joke about two unrelated things sharing a moment of cultural prominence. Gluten-free diets had become a major dietary trend in American consumer culture, and the Ebola virus was spreading through West Africa with a death toll that was generating significant international concern about the possibility of the disease reaching the United States. The episode was not really about Ebola. It used the word in its title as a gesture toward absurdity. The first confirmed case of Ebola in the United States was announced on September 30th, 2014, the day before the episode aired. The first American death from that outbreak occurred on October 8th, a week after the episode. The episode had put Ebola in its title as a comedy gesture on the same week that the disease actually arrived in American hospitals for the first time. The show's treatment of Mel Gibson in 2004 represents a category of apparent prediction where the satire targets what a public figure already is, and the public figure then demonstrates it more clearly. The episode, called The Passion of the Jew in Season 8, followed from the release of Mel Gibson's film The Passion of the Christ. The episode depicted Gibson as a masochist, an extremist, and someone whose personality contained significant instability beneath the public-facing religious devotion. 2 years after the episode aired, in 2006, Gibson was pulled over for drunk driving in Malibu. During the arrest, he made a series of anti-Semitic statements that were recorded and leaked. He had also reportedly told officers that Jewish people were responsible for all the world's wars. The South Park episode from 2004 had depicted Gibson as someone whose public persona concealed something considerably darker and whose extremism was genuine rather than performative. The episode had been a satirical exaggeration. The 2006 arrest was confirmation that the exaggeration had been directed at something real. Confederate flag debates appeared in South Park's 4th season in an episode called Chef Goes Nanners, which aired in 2000. The episode centered on the town's flag, which depicted a group of white figures hanging a black figure. The debate in the episode was structurally the same as the debates that would dominate American public life in 2015 after the Charleston church shooting and accelerate through the early 2020s. Whether a symbol with historical significance that also carried a directly offensive meaning should be preserved or removed. South Park did the argument in 2000 with cartoon surrealism, but the underlying positions mapped onto the real debate that followed by 15 to 20 years. The episode called About Last Night aired on November 5, 2008. The 2008 United States presidential election was held on November 4th. South Park aired its response the following night. The episode's production team had written 2 versions of the episode in advance, one for each outcome, and aired the relevant one within 24 hours of the result being confirmed. The depiction of election night showed the liberal side of South Park in wild, tearful celebration that escalated into property damage and chaos, while the conservative side descended into quiet despair and apocalyptic resignation. What ties these together is the production schedule's relationship with real events. The show's 6-day turnaround means it is always working on the same week as its audience, pulling from the same news cycle and finishing just before delivery. When Parker and Stone wrote the Jared episode in 2002, they were looking at a real Subway spokesman and finding the most extreme version of his persona that could be made funny. When they wrote the Cosby scene in December 2014, they were working in the same days that Beverly Johnson was preparing to publish her account. When they wrote Put It Down in 2017, they were watching real tweets and depicting a logical escalation of them. The Jared case is the most unsettling because the gap between the satire and the reality was not a matter of days or weeks, but 13 years, and the reality was worse than the satire. The episode had been a joke about a misheard word. What emerged in 2015 was not a misunderstanding at all. The Bill Cosby Trapper Keeper line in 2000 was written as an innocuous callback to a previous storyline. 14 years later, the sentence describing why Cartman would not befriend a man over 30 had become one of the more specifically relevant sentences in the show's catalog. The show did not know these things were coming. The show was pulling at threads that were already there in the cultural fabric, and sometimes the thread, when pulled, revealed something that had been there all along. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The question of whether South Park predicts things or simply describes conditions that were already present is the most honest way to think about the patterns above. The final 2 sections of this iceberg go to places that are harder to categorize, starting with the racial politics of an episode that used a specific word 42 times in 20 minutes and was praised by the Knock. Section 9, with apologies to Jesse Jackson, South Park needed a real-world event to build the rest of the episode around. The Wheel of Fortune scene was a perfect cold open, but it was just a cold open. Without something to anchor the episode's argument in current events, the slur would be the joke rather than the subject. Then November 2006 happened. The episode aired on March 7, 2007, as the 11th season premiere. Parker had described the Wheel of Fortune scene as one of his favorite things the show had ever produced. He and Stone had wanted to make an episode specifically engaging the slur for some time, but had struggled to find a plot that could support the idea beyond the opening scene. What provided the opening was Michael Richards. On November 17, 2006, Richards performed at the Laugh Factory Comedy Club in West Hollywood. Audience members heckled him during the set. Richards responded by repeatedly screaming the slur at the black patrons in the audience, including statements that framed the language within the history of racial violence in America, referencing lynching directly. A cell phone video captured the tirade. TMZ obtained and published it within days. The footage spread quickly, and Richards' career effectively ended with it. He had played Cosmo Kramer on Seinfeld for 9 seasons. None of that survived the video. Richards appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman via satellite link, sitting beside Jerry Seinfeld, and apologized. He said the words came out of anger, that he is not a racist, and that he was deeply, deeply sorry. He then went on the Reverend Jesse Jackson's nationally syndicated radio program, Keep Hope Alive, for a 2-hour session that included Jackson, Al Sharpton, callers from the audience at the Laugh Factory, a politician, and a therapist. Richards told Jackson he was shattered by what had happened, that he had never used the word before, and that it came through him like a freight train. The program was structured as a formal absolution ritual, with Jackson as the presiding authority. Parker and Stone found the apology circuit contemptible in a specific way, not the apology itself, the circuit. Richards had gone directly to Jesse Jackson, as though though Jackson's forgiveness constituted the resolution of the matter, as though one prominent black leader's acceptance of a formal apology could close the transaction. Vernon Chapman, a biracial staff writer on the show, was particularly angry about this. His reaction, that Jackson was being treated as the ambassador or representative of all black Americans through whom racial offenses could be formally discharged, became the line that Token delivers to Stan. Jesse Jackson is not the emperor of black people. Stan, baffled, replies that Jackson told his father he was. The episode worked on 2 tracks simultaneously. On the surface, it was a comedy about a man who said a terrible word accidentally and then ran a completely ineffective apology campaign. Randy tried everything. He apologized to Jesse Jackson and was made to literally kiss Jackson's buttocks before forgiveness was granted, a scene that played the apology ritual as both humiliating and meaningless. A photograph of the act was published in newspapers. Stan came to Token expecting the photo to resolve things between them. Token's response was that Jesse Jackson has no authority over what Token personally needs to hear. Stan did not understand this. The episode then ran through Randy's escalation. He joined a political campaign to criminalize the word, gathered with other men who had publicly said the word and shared the social category of N-word guys, and eventually took his case to the Senate, where legislators passed a law making the slur illegal in specific grammatical contexts. Nobody felt better. The word appears in the episode 42 times, 3 times as an outright utterance, 39 times in the compound form that became Randy's social classification, attached to the word guy, meaning the episode found a way to repeat the word constantly while technically using it in a different register each time. Parker and Stone were explicit in DVD commentary about what they were expressing with the repetition. They described the experiment of imagining an equivalent slur directed at white people and then imagining how white people would respond. Their conclusion was that the response depicted in the episode, the political campaign, the legislation, the Senate vote, the complete fixation on the word's existence as a problem in itself rather than the underlying conditions it reflected, was exactly how white people would respond if the situation were reversed. The episode was using Randy's farcical overreaction as a mirror. The subplot ran a parallel argument. Dr. Nelson, a little person, arrives at South Park Elementary as a teacher. Cartman cannot stop laughing at him. The school brings in Dr. Nelson specifically to help the students understand that little people deserve the same respect as anyone else and that laughing at them is inappropriate. Dr. Nelson attempts to explain his experience. Cartman laughs throughout. Eventually, Dr. Nelson challenges Cartman to a physical confrontation, which Cartman also finds hilarious and which ends inconclusively in Cartman's favor through some combination of absurdity and Cartman's genuine imperviousness to shame. Dr. Nelson storms off saying he has made his point. The other students look at each other, unsure what the point was. Stan, watching this, has a realization. He goes back to Token and tells him something that the show had not, to that point, articulated in an episode on a racial subject. Stan tells Token that he will never understand how it feels to have that word used against him. He says this not as an evasion or a hedge, but as the honest conclusion of everything he has watched happen during the episode. He cannot understand it because he is not black. He has tried to minimize it, tried to resolve it through official channels, tried to explain it away as accident and stupidity. None of that addressed what Token actually needed, which was an acknowledgement that the impact of the word exists in a register that Stan simply does not have access to. Token responds that this is what he was looking for all along. The episode used the word 42 times, and its conclusion was that the word carries a specific weight that cannot be accessed by someone who has not lived with it as a target. These two facts sit in unusual relationship with each other. The show spent 22 minutes deploying a word that it then acknowledged, through its most moral character, produces a specific form of harm that the person deploying it cannot fully understand. Parker and Stone were doing something structurally complex, using the word to argue about the weight of the word, through a character whose use of it was accidental, and whose son's inability to absorb its impact was the episode's actual subject. The Knock praised the episode. Their statement called it a good example of educating the public on the power of hate words, including the slur, and their impact on individuals. The Parents Television Council condemned it. The contrast illustrates the split the episode fell into. Viewers who understood what the episode was doing tended to find it valuable. Viewers who encountered it at the level of content rather than argument tended to find it indefensible. The same 42 uses of the word were evaluated entirely differently depending on whether the viewer had followed the episode's argument to its conclusion. Michael Richards appears briefly in the episode as a cameo. He joins Randy's support group for people who have publicly said the word and become permanently defined by it. In his scene, Richards tells Randy that he is not that good of a comedian and had only used the word in an attempt to get cheap laughs. This was a piece of satire directed at Richards specifically, suggesting that the tirade had its roots in creative bankruptcy rather than in the deeply felt rage Richards described in his own apologies. Parker and Stone found the explanation Richards gave, that the word came through him like a freight train train out of nowhere. Less believable than the explanation that a performer who was losing control of an audience reached for the most reliably shocking word available. The episode's mechanics depend on a distinction the show made explicit between Randy's use of the word and Richard's use of it. Randy said the wrong answer in a situation where the wrong answer and the right answer were identical on a game board. Richard screamed the word repeatedly at specific black people in an audience, while referencing historical violence against them. The episode used Randy's accidental use as the vehicle for the argument, but the argument was about the word's weight regardless of context, which meant even Randy's accident carried consequences that no formal process could discharge. The Jesse Jackson apology ritual, the legislation, the support group, the Senate vote, none of these addressed the fundamental experience Token described, because the fundamental experience was not about Randy's intent, but about the word's history and what it means when it arrives at a person. Token's character had been on the show since its earliest seasons. His name is a joke about his position in the town's population, the only black kid, a fact the show had acknowledged and played with since his introduction. The episode gave Token an extended moment of genuine moral authority that was unusual within the show's structure. South Park typically distributes moral clarity between Stan and Kyle, with Stan delivering the final speech and Kyle serving as the voice of reason. In this episode, Token delivered the moral conclusion, and it was a conclusion that Stan had to accept rather than arrive at himself. Stan's role was to listen and concede. The episode ended with him admitting that he will never understand, and Token confirming that this admission was what the conversation required. The Knox praise and the PTC's condemnation came from the same episode, and both were responding accurately to what they were looking at. The episode contained 42 utterances of a word that is considered one of the most harmful in American English, and it also contained a carefully constructed argument about why that harm exists and why no official mechanism fully addresses it. These two things were the same episode. The show's history of using extreme content to make arguments that would be ignored if delivered without the extreme content was fully operational in this episode, and the question of whether the argument justified the method was one that viewers answered based on where they were positioned relative to both the word and the argument. Parker and Stone had long wanted to make the episode. The Michael Richards incident in November 2006 gave them a plot. The episode aired in March 2007. The speed of the show's production meant they could absorb a news event from the previous November and build an entire argument around its mechanics by spring. What the Richards incident had demonstrated, beyond the obvious, was the specific shape of the public contrition circuit and the gap between that circuit and the actual impact of the word on the people it was used against. Token's response to Jesse Jackson's photograph made that gap legible as comedy and as argument simultaneously. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final layer covered in this video goes deeper, to a piece of the show's history that rarely appears in the usual discussions of South Park's darkness, and it involves the earliest years of the show. Section 10. What the show takes before South Park existed. Trey Parker made a film about cannibalism and named the horse after a woman who broke his heart. The film was called Cannibal the Musical, made in 1993 while Parker and Stone were students at the University of Colorado, and it followed the real story of Alfred Packer, the only American ever convicted of cannibalism. During production, Parker was thrown from one of the horses and fractured his hip. The horse's name was Leanne. He had given it the name of his ex-fiancée, Leon Adamo, who had been unfaithful to him during their engagement. The horse threw him and broke something. Somehow that seemed appropriate to him. The name Leanne went into the show when South Park premiered 4 years later. Eric Cartman's mother was named Leanne Cartman. Her character in the early seasons was defined primarily by sexual permissiveness and an inability to set limits on a child who consistently treated her as an obstacle or an appliance. She was a good-natured person with a chaotic personal history, shown in various episodes to have had sex with a large portion of the town's adult male population. Parker described the character as a bitter tribute to the woman who had inspired the name. He used that phrase, bitter tribute. The most prominent female character in a show, watched by millions of people, was, from the moment of her creation, a piece of grief dressed up as a recurring joke. This is the layer of South Park's history that rarely gets discussed, alongside the death threats and the banned episodes and the wars with Scientology. The external controversies are well documented. The internal ones, the things Parker and Stone put into the show from their own lives, are harder to see but present from the beginning. Parker had been engaged before South Park. He had attended Berklee College of Music in Boston after high school, studying there for 1 semester before leaving for the University of Colorado to study film. There he met Stone, a math major who had ended up in film class through a combination of interest and scheduling. The voices they used for the South Park children began as a way to make each other laugh during film shoots on other people's projects. They would do the kid voices to amuse themselves during the boring parts of other students' productions, and eventually they decided to use the voices for something. Jesus vs. Frosty was made with construction paper, scissors, scissors, glue, and an old 8mm film camera. The first version of Cartman, who was called Kenny in that short, was drawn from construction paper. The first character ever killed by a South Park snowman was construction paper. Parker had screened Jesus vs. Frosty for a university audience in December 1992, and the reaction told him something. The combination of child voices and adult language and crude violence had produced something people found funny in a way they had not expected. 3 years later, a Fox executive named Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone $2,000 to make a second short as a video Christmas card for his friends. They made Jesus vs. Santa. Graydon distributed it to 80 people. Then someone digitized it, and it began to spread across early internet networks, becoming what is sometimes described as one of the first viral videos. Years before the concept had a name, Comedy Central saw it, and South Park was developed from the short into a series. Fox had been the first network they pitched. Fox declined because one of the ideas Parker and Stone brought to the pitch included a character who was a sentient piece of feces. That character became Mr. Hanky. Fox's rejection of a show because of a talking piece of excrement is now a footnote to a deal that became, in 2025, a contract worth more than $1 billion. Comedy Central executive Doug Herzog watched the short and commissioned the development. The show premiered on August 13, 1997. The production model Parker and Stone adopted from the beginning set conditions that do not resemble anything else in American television. Every episode is written, animated, voiced, scored, and delivered in 6 days. Parker does the majority of the writing himself. Stone handles more of the production logistics. Within 6 days of an air date, the episode begins as a blank document and ends as a completed broadcast. The schedule was not a financial decision or a network requirement. Parker and Stone chose it because they wanted the show to be able to respond to current events within the same week those events occurred. The cost of that capability was the schedule, and the schedule was one of the most demanding production environments in the medium. Parker has spoken about the psychological weight of the schedule in specific terms. In a documentary made about the production process, he described a recurring pattern where every episode, by Thursday or Friday of its production week, feels to him like the worst thing he has ever made. He said that every Tuesday, the show's executive producer, Ann Garofino, knows she will need to keep Parker from walking away from the episode. He described it as being talked off a cliff every week. He went home after one episode and was so convinced he had lost his ability to do the work that he could not sleep. The episode turned out to be the World of Warcraft episode from season 10, which became one of the most celebrated in the show's history, and which fans and critics still cite as one of its finest moments. Parker said he had literally wanted to kill himself over that episode. The phrase he used was a colloquial one, an expression of despair rather than a literal statement, but it accurately describes the psychological state that the production schedule produces. Parker sits in a room for 6 days, writing, rewriting, arguing, performing voices, reviewing animation, and delivering something that will be watched by millions of people. The episode he is certain is terrible on Thursday is the one they find out on Friday people loved. This happens repeatedly enough that he has described it as a pattern. He knows the pattern exists. The knowledge does not make it easier because the feeling at Thursday is real regardless of what Friday brings. Stone said in an interview around the time of the Book of Mormon's Broadway opening that Parker is the one who carries the show's creative weight. The way he described it was that even though the show is a partnership, the stories are expressed completely through Parker. Parker is the chef, Stone said. The production cycle runs through Parker in a way that has made the schedule, over more than 25 seasons, into something personal in a way it cannot be for anyone else on the staff. The writing is not distributed across a team in the standard television model. Parker writes it, usually alone in the final hours. There is a specific episode where this weight became visible as content rather than just as a working condition. Season 15 included a 2-part storyline in which Stan Marsh turned 10 and found that everything around him had become pointless. Music that he used to love sounded awful. Food that he used to enjoy tasted like nothing. He picked fights with the people around him. He described everything as just a little bit crappy. His parents initially misunderstood the situation, assuming he was being difficult. Eventually, a doctor diagnosed him with a clinical condition. The episode was widely read by viewers as autobiographical, as Parker using the character of Stan, who has always been the closest to an author surrogate in the cast, to describe something he was experiencing himself. Parker has never explicitly confirmed this reading, but he has also never denied it, and the show's willingness to explore depression through its most straightforwardly sincere character is its own kind of answer. The character of Leanne Cartman has appeared in more than 200 episodes. She has been voiced by 3 different actresses, the first of whom died during the show's 3rd season. The character began as a bitter tribute to a real woman, settled into a recurring role as the most unconditionally loving mother in South Park's family structure, and evolved over 28 seasons into one of the show's most consistent presences. Cartman treats her terribly. He manipulates her, lies to her, uses her resources without guilt, and periodically reduces her to a supporting prop in whatever scheme he is running at any given time. She absorbs it. She loves him anyway. The show never conclusively resolves this into either sentimentality or tragedy. It simply runs it as the operating condition of their relationship. The first time South Park missed an air date in its entire run was in October 2013, during the show's 17th season. The studios lost power. Parker's statement was brief. He said they had been tempting fate by delivering the show at the last minute for 16 years, and he supposed it was bound to happen eventually. They had never missed a deadline before that. The episode was delivered the following week. 16 years of never missing a deadline on a 6-day production cycle, across hundreds of episodes, covering every significant event in American cultural and political life since 1997. The schedule that produced all of it, that produced the Scientology war, and the death threats, and the China erasure, and the Scott Tenorman episode, and the school shooting satire, and the ritual sacrifice of a fictional Britney Spears, ran through two people who started by making animated construction paper shorts at a film school in Colorado. The horse named Leanne fractured Parker's hip, and he put the name into the show's most prominent female character. The show ran for almost 30 years. By the most recent deal, it will run for at least 5 more. Stone said in a Hollywood Reporter interview around 2011 that Parker avoids conflict like the plague, while he himself has a temper he is not proud of. The two have maintained a creative partnership and a friendship across the entirety of that run, through 2 of Parker's marriages, through the death threats, through the Scientology war, through the deaths and the losses and the controversies, and the decades of weekly deadlines. Parker said in a different interview that the friendship becomes greater because of the shared thing they have that they do not share with other people. What they share is the show, and the show takes a lot. The 6 days, the sleeplessness, the Thursday cliff, the certainty every week that this episode will be the one that finally proves they have lost the ability to do it, and then the thing going out on Wednesday and people watching it. What the show takes from its creators exists in the same space as what it gives. It takes the schedule, and the burnout, and the Leanne Adamo story, and the death threats, and the endless weeks. It gives them the creative control, the platform, the ability to put anything they believe into a voice that reaches millions of people within days of them thinking it. Parker and Stone structured their contract with Comedy Central early on around the right to refuse any note they did not want to take. They kept that right across every subsequent deal. The show that generated death threats and banned episodes and international erasures and industry-wide controversy was made by 2 people who retained the right to say no to their network and exercised it constantly. The character of Cartman is what happens when a creator builds a figure to hold his own worst impulses and then refuses to contain him. Cartman cried over Scott Tenorman's tears and called them delicious. Cartman manipulated Leanne for 30 years because she would not stop loving him. Cartman ran campaigns that escalated until they had caused irreversible harm and then experienced only the mildest version of consequences. Parker and Stone called the episode where Cartman made Scott eat his parents one of their favorites. They listed it alongside the ones they consider their best work. The darkness was not incidental. The darkness was the point. South Park has now aired for more than 28 seasons and 330 episodes. Its creators have received death threats, been erased from an entire country's internet, generated enough controversy to film multiple documentaries, and watched the show's original female voice actress die during its 3rd season. They have also made some of the most discussed individual episodes of any American animated series, built a Broadway musical that won 9 Tony Awards, and structured a deal worth more than $1 billion while simultaneously releasing an episode mocking the company that had just given them the money. The show is still being made. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.